We are here today to do a little presentation on what to do when you've been lied to by your partner. And I know that that is always a really difficult thing to go through. It's a really difficult thing to try and navigate. And that's why I wanted to come on here and talk a little bit about things that we can do to make the situation more palatable and just overall easier to get through. This presentation is really about what to do when you've been lied to by your partner, what to do when you are in that situation. So here's the thing, that partnerships, true partnerships, require trust. This is not a secret. Everybody says it. Everybody knows it. Even if you're in denial about it, on a subconscious level, we know this. Trust is the fabric of a good relationship, because when we're really looking for a partnership, which I think most of us really are. I don't think most of us get in our relationship because we want someone to take care of, or we want someone to burden us or anything like that. We're looking for a person to come together with us, to live our life with, to really share our experience with and grow with. And, these are all the things that describe what partnership is. And so in order to have that, we have to have trust. And what starts to happen is when we're in a situation where our partner has lied to us, what winds up happening to the trust is that it gets kind of this little fracture. And I want you to think about fracturing the trust as if you were fracturing a bone in your body. It's not that a fracture can't heal. It can. But if a fracture isn't taken care of properly and you don't allow it to heal properly, then that can be devastating. And so what happens if we have these little fractures of our trust, and our first fracture hasn't really healed properly, and we haven't really dealt with it, we haven't set the bone, we haven't put a cast on it, we haven't done what's necessary for it to heal, is that the next situation comes along and we get another little fracture. Again, it's not that that fracture alone can't heal, but we have to do the things necessary. And so if we, once again, we don't heal that fracture, another one comes along, and then another one comes along. And over time, these little fractures just build up and they start to chip away at our trust. Just like if we, like I said, with the body, if we have a bone fracture and it doesn't heal properly and we're not taking care of ourselves, and we're saying, okay, I've got a broken leg or I've got a fractured leg, but, I didn't go to the doctor, and I'm just gonna, I'm gonna go out snow machining. I'm gonna go out four-wheeling. I'm gonna go skydiving. I'm just going to continue living as if this fracture isn't going to affect me. If we do that physically and we continue on with reckless behavior, we're going to wind up hurting our body in other ways. And this is the exact same thing with trust. So it is really important for us to heal these fractures as they happen and as they come one at a time, because when we wind up with a trust situation looking like this, what you're seeing on the screen, with a whole bunch of fractures that haven't been dealt with, what's going to wind up happening? The trust is going to crumble. It's not that hard to understand. And then the only thing that's left behind is the scars. And that's what's going to wind up happening to our relationship if we don't start to heal the fractures as they happen. And ultimately, that's what we don't want for our partnership. So that's why we're here. So there are a few steps. I want to break this down into some really simple steps that you can tackle and do to start dealing with these fractures as they happen. So, step number one is to handle your own emotions about the situation. Now, when our partner has lied to us, that is going to evoke a whole slew of what we consider to be negative emotions, uncomfortable emotions. We're going to feel hurt. We're going to feel angry. We're going to feel betrayed. We're going to feel a whole slew of negative emotions. And we need to be able to handle our own emotions prior to moving on. And a lot of people skip over this step, and it really is vitally important because understand that when you're feeling those negative emotions, when you're feeling the anger and the hurt and the betrayal and all of these things, it's really us being triggered. And so if we are reacting from a place of emotion and simply because we're triggered, understand that those conversations are not going to be as productive. Now, again, it's not that if you want to skip over this step and you decide that the way you want to tackle this is by going and yelling at your partner, I don't consider that to be the best way. Again, I think that there is a way that we can handle this better with more compassion. And when you're reacting based on emotion, based on your triggers, all you're going to wind up doing is triggering your partner's stuff too. It winds up being a big fight, and we just don't need to do it. So step number one is that you have to handle your own stuff first. And we're going to go a little deeper into that. But that's number one. That's why. So step number two is determining why the lie happened in the first place. And again, we're going to go further into these steps, but if we don't understand the why, and we just know that we've been lied to, and so therefore we've labeled our partner as a liar, and, we just want to move past it and brush it off. First of all, what you've done there is really, you've made yourself the judge, jury, and executioner, and you aren't willing to listen to what they have to say. It's inexcusable. Again, it can just lead to a lot more discomfort. And so the whole point of this is to make it a little easier. Again, if that's a route you want to go, that's a choice. I choose a better one, and I'm teaching a better one. So next step is then determining whether or not a boundary is needed. And sometimes the answer will be yes. Other times the answer might be no. But if we don't do that second step, we don't really know. So let's go a little deeper into these three steps. All right. So handling your own emotions. Anyone that's worked with me privately, anyone that's worked with me in my courses, and knows how I operate as a coach, I am a big proponent for handling your own shit first. Okay. Again, we're reacting based on our triggers. And when you're reacting emotionally versus being more responsive, when we come to our partner, come to a relationship from a place of being more responsive, we typically wind up being more proud of the way that we handled things. So a lot of the time when we're coming based on emotional reactivity, we wind up handling things in a way that we're not very proud of. So this is going to save you a lot of angst, I think, and regret later on. So in order to handle our own emotions and really recenter ourselves, I use a 4-step process that I call SNOW. And SNOW is the acronym that I use. Obviously, reminds you of Alaska, but I want you to remember this because snow, if you've ever grown up in a place that has snow, and most people in this group, you being from Alaska, are familiar with it. If you've ever laid down and just let the snow fall on you, or just stood there and looked up when it was snowing, it is so calming and peaceful. And so when I think sort of handling my emotions, recalming, recentering, I think of snow. And so I'm going to go through the acronym with you, because this is what I use with all of my clients to help them think about rebalancing themselves. So the S in snow stands for sense when you're out of balance. Most of us can figure out when we're all worked up. A lot of us are aware more of the physical sensations that come up. Sometimes your hands get hot or your heart starts racing, things like that. So whether or not you're sensing the physical side of it, or you're able to really get in touch with your emotions and understand, like, okay, I'm not balanced right now, I'm feeling really triggered. Either way, sensing when you are not balanced and calm is really the first step in the process, which leads us to the next step, which is the N stands for name the emotion. A lot of the time, you can feel your feelings, but just being able to sort of take a step back, again, sensing when we're in that place, and really labeling what it is that you're feeling, can be a very, very helpful step, because there is a difference between rage and frustration. There's a difference between anger and irritation. There's a difference between melancholy and severe depression. So just being able to sort of step back and label the emotion, name that emotion, and really put that label on it can be helpful, because a lot of the time it can give us really a scale of how intense this feeling even is. So that can help us really start to recenter. The next thing that we do, the O stands for, is observe the message behind the emotion. And we do this because once we figured out what it is that we're actually feeling, let's say I'm in a situation where I'm feeling hurt, I'm feeling sad. What observing the message behind the emotion is doing is helping me really understand what it is that is being triggered. So if I'm in a situation where I've been lied to by my partner, and I can take a step back and understand that I'm feeling really hurt, and I've named that emotion as hurt, then I can sort of take another step back, sort of dig one layer deeper and understand, why am I feeling hurt? What is being triggered within me that is making me, specifically the emotion of hurt, come up? And so maybe, depending on the situation, if I'm feeling hurt because I've been lied to by my partner, it's because the message that's going on in the background is that I'm not important, or I'm not worthy of the truth. There are all kinds of subconscious messages that can be triggered here. But until we sort of understand what emotion we're feeling and the message that's going on and the way that we're being triggered, sort of the why behind it, it can be really hard for us to move forward and feel resolution to it. So once we have figured out how we're feeling and observed what it is that's triggering us, that message that's going on, or as some people say, the story that I'm telling myself, the last step in this process, the W stands for wield compassion for yourself. And I find that this is often the step that people skip. People can understand, like, all right, I'm triggered. all right, here's what I'm feeling. And as we sort of go through this process, it becomes a little more difficult because people can forget to sort of take that one step back. And even if they understand why they're feeling that emotion, that W, the wielding compassion for yourself, which I think is the most important step in the process, people tend to skip over. So in a situation, and I'm just going to carry on with the scenario I've already given, my partner's lied to me. I figured out that I'm feeling really hurt by that because it has triggered something in me that tells me that I'm not important. The next step, if I'm going to wield compassion for myself, is to really ask myself, is that true? Is that true that I'm not important? And because we can be our own worst critics, that's, I think, why this step can sometimes be the most difficult. So if it is helpful for you, and this is honestly where I had to start when I was sort of going on my own emotional journey, was if my best friend told me that message, what would my response to her be? So if my best friend, out of her mouth, she said, I'm not important, how would I respond to her? It is so much easier for us to have compassion for others over compassion for ourselves sometimes. And so if you really feel like you're struggling with this step, or it's something that you do tend to skip over, ask yourself what you would say to someone else if that message was coming up. It can be your child. It can be your best friend. It can be a parent, just another loved one that you really, truly care for and love. If that message was coming up for them and they said it out loud, what would your response be? Tell yourself that. So if the message that's coming up is, I'm not important, I wield compassion for myself by saying, that's absolutely untrue. Your opinion is as important as anyone else's. And so I also call this step reparenting yourself. When these messages come up, you sort of parent yourself by guiding yourself to your own natural empathy and tapping into that. So that is the SNOW process. And I have found that if you actually work each step here, by the time you get to wielding the compassion for yourself so that you have dealt with the way that you're actually being triggered, you tend to be much more centered, much more rebalanced, and sort of ready to then take action, move on to the next step. So the next step in this process is really determining why it happened. And that is typically going to require a conversation. So we need to be able to have a conversation with our partner at this point. Again, if you skip the first step and you don't handle your shit first, you are going to be having a conversation with your partner from a very emotional place. And once again, those tend not to be the most productive conversations. So don't forget step one. But as long as we're working the system, if you've done step one and so you're ready to have that balanced, calm conversation with your partner, when you go into this conversation, your goal is really to be open to hearing and understanding their perspective. So our goal here is to understand the why. Why did the lie even occur? Why are we in this situation in the first place? Now, if you go into this conversation, holding like torches and pitchforks, your partner probably isn't going to be very emotionally open to having this conversation anyway. So the goal is to come into the conversation calm and really be open to understanding their perspective. When you come to it from a place of curiosity, why did this happen? Please explain to me I want to understand your thought process. I want to understand what was going on for you. I want to understand your side of the situation. it tends to be a much more productive conversation. Now, once we have kind of really grasped their perspective of why this lie even occurred in the first place, there are a couple of things that, a couple places that we can really take it from there. And at this point, we really need to determine if boundaries are needed or not. Now, if you have had that conversation with your partner and you understand their perspective, and maybe through this conversation, they've understood your perspective and have admitted that, you know, maybe that wasn't the best way for me to handle it, and I'm going to do something differently in the future, some situations might naturally resolve themselves. And in which case, it's really up to you to determine whether or not a boundary is needed. Sometimes they're not. So just be aware of that. And other times they absolutely are. Because again, we don't want these fractures to continue occurring. The goal is to try and do it better so that we are not continuing to chip away at that trust and it doesn't continue to crumble. So if you're in a situation where you feel that it is necessary for you to set a boundary, follow that intuition and set a boundary. But part of boundary setting is being able to set a consequence for the boundary that you're actually willing to follow through with. A lot of the time when people set boundaries, they set a consequence that they're not really going to follow through with. Like, oh, if you ever lie to me again, I'm walking out. Now, if you've gotten to that point in your relationship and you really mean it, then okay. But don't say that if the next time this happens, you're not ready to pack your bags. Don't use it as an empty threat. So the consequence that you set really needs to be something that you feel is appropriate, and it needs to be an action that you feel good about following through with. So let's take a situation where my partner has maybe lied to me about, you know, finances. And so my partner has lied to me about, I don't know, spending money. And I have this conversation with my partner about why it happened. And I understand their perspective of why it happened, but I'm feeling like a boundary is necessary to make sure that this kind of situation doesn't continue happening. So I can communicate to my partner something along the lines of, you know, because I don't want to see this situation continuing to occur. You know, if something like this happens again, I think that we need to sit down and really have a conversation about our finances and accessibility to our finances, co-financing, sort of have that conversation, because I don't want to continue being lied to about the money that you're spending. And I don't think that that's unreasonable, and I don't think it's appropriate. So I can sort of set a boundary and set a consequence that if we wind up in this situation again, we're going to have a serious talk about, you know, maybe that boundary looks like them having a budget or having their own separate spending account. You know, every situation is different, and what works for different couples, you know, varies. And so there's no hard and fast rule on what this looks like, but understand that when it comes to boundary setting, you've got to be willing to say, this is the boundary. We're all in agreement that this is a boundary, and everyone is on the same page about what the consequence looks like. And so everyone is operating with the same understanding. So again, just to wrap it up here, the 3 steps that we really want to work if we are in a situation where we've been lied to by our partner is handling our emotions, determining why it happened, and determining whether or not a boundary is needed so that this kind of thing doesn't continue happening. And again, it's not always needed. Sometimes the resolution just happens naturally, but these are the things that are going to help those fractures heal. And so that trust can be repaired and continue to just remain intact. I hope that everyone enjoyed the presentation. If you have any suggestions on topics that you want me to cover, now I have a Questions for Callie website that you can go to, questionsforcallie.com. And it's really just a forum for people to drop their questions or subjects that they want me to talk on and cover a little more. Take care. Bye.